I don't know about you, but as we enter into the holiday season, life gets busier and busier and busier. In the middle of that, it can seem like there's just no peace, no matter how many times you hear the song "Peace on Earth." As many times as you may hear that, it does not feel like there's any peace at all. And so, how do you keep your peace, not just this holiday season, but throughout all of life? That's what we're talking about on this episode of The Fourfold Disciple. This is The Fourfold Disciple, a podcast from Emmett Ministries, where we aim to connect theology, apologetics, and cultural engagement for your growth as a disciple becoming a discipler of others. Last week, as we kicked off our Advent series, we talked about hope. And hope for the return of Christ, looking to that, longing for that. But the next thing that we're talking about this week is peace. And I think it's significant that we focus on peace, and there's the logic to the Advent season in that, where you go from hope to peace. And I think that's because as we await for Christ, as we hope for Christ to come back, we gain peace. We live with a peace no matter what is going on in the world. Now, I think it's important that we talk about where that peace comes from, what the foundation of Christian peace is. Romans 5 says this: "Therefore, since we have been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ. Through him we have also obtained access into his grace, into this grace in which we stand, and we rejoice in hope of the glory of God." We get that because of faith. We've attained access by faith, where we are rejoicing in the hope of the glory of God. We rejoice now. It's a part of what we do. We're rejoicing, and it's a result of peace with God. Why do we have peace right now? It's a very important question. As Christians, you should ask yourself this question: why can I have peace? Why is peace attainable for me right now in this moment, in the season of busyness, maybe in a season of sorrow, maybe even in a season of joy? Why can I have peace right now? And it starts with this foundational principle: because you have peace with God. Peace with God is the beginning to have peace, the peace of God. Because through Christ's death, his burial, and his resurrection, we can have peace. It's essential for us to understand that if you do not have peace with God, you will not have the peace of God throughout life. And the reason we associate peace with Christmas during this time is because Jesus has come and brought peace with God between man and God. There's been reconciliation. There is peace. There is no peace brought to us if Christ does not come in the form of a babe, the incarnate Son of God, becoming man on our behalf, dying the death that we deserve, being raised from the grave. That is where peace starts. Peace without the incarnation, there is no peace. With God, there is no peace of God. Christ coming and living the perfect life ultimately takes those who are enemies of God and makes them friends of God. I think it's a really significant thing for us. If we're to think about wanting the peace of God, that we must first start with this foundational principle that we have peace with God. And at some point, you and I did not have peace with God. By nature, we hated God. We were dead in our trespasses and sins. We were God's enemies. Yet while we were still weak, Christ died for the ungodly. He died for us. He came. He lived the life we couldn't live, and he died the death that we deserved. That's so significant for us, because that means at the core of everything you and I do as Christians is we live out the reality that we have peace with God. That means that we can go into the day, no matter how hard or how good it is, with the peace of God. Resting in not what we can do, not in what we have done, but in him who has already done it, and in him who will come again. That's why the peace with God is so significant for us to have. We call the peace with God the vertical peace. And it results in horizontal peace, where we go from where we have the peace with God to now we have the peace of God, to have peace with men and women, to live in this world with true, lasting peace. Now, because Christ has come, because we live as followers of him, we can have the peace of God. And this isn't a peace that runs out, and that's significant for us. As Christians, we must understand the peace of God does not run out, but it is a well that we get to drink from. Because now that we have peace with God, we will have the peace of God to go through the days and rejoice because we've attained access to the throne of God. We stand in grace and we get to look at and rejoice in the glory of God. To walk with the peace of God day in and day out means that we're looking and reminding ourselves of the glory of God. It means real peace right now is possible and attainable for Christians because they have the peace with God that leads to the peace of God, allowing them to have full access to God himself, to cry out to him. This means we don't have to run. It means that we can run to him. We don't have to hide from him, but we can run to him. It means that we can walk with boldness into the throne room, crying out to him, praying prayers, tears in the bad days. It means that when our day is bad or good, we can walk into his presence and just revel and marvel in the glory of God. We have peace of God because we are in God's presence, which is attained to us by Christ, who gives us the peace with God when we put our faith in him. That's significant. It's integral to the Christian life that we have peace with God, which leads us to being able to attain access to the throne of grace. And now, because of that, we stand in this grace and we have the peace of God. I remember hearing a story of sailors who were lost at sea. And they talked about how if they were able to just keep their eyes on the shore, they could keep their calm. They could keep their cool in the midst of a really serious situation. But when they took their eyes off of the shore, they got very nervous. They got scared. They moved around. The tumultuousness of being at sea became more and more real as they were at sea, and they couldn't see the shore. And I think that's kind of even what we see in Peter when he's walking out on the water and he takes his eyes off Christ, and all of a sudden he begins to sink in just how scary everything can be. Oftentimes, the reason that we don't have the peace of God as Christians, actually all of the times, that the reason we don't have the peace of God as Christians isn't because God has removed it from us. It's because we have stopped looking at Christ. We have stopped looking at the one who has brought peace with God to us. We've stopped looking at the glory of God. I hope the point is clear that when we stop looking at Christ, we will not have the peace of God. When we neglect God in prayer, when we neglect the word, when we neglect the gathering of the saints, when we neglect being held accountable, when we neglect walking a life with Christ, we will not have the peace of God because we have taken our eyes off of the great glory of the one who is our hope, our treasure, our great and mighty God. We cannot do that. We must keep our eyes on him. And if we do, we will find that we have peace throughout all of our days, throughout the busy, throughout the hard, throughout the difficult, throughout the good, throughout the easy. We will have the peace of God. We must keep our gaze on Christ in the good days and in the bad days, because it is there that we see his glory and we rest in the peace that does not fade away. So as we continue working our way through Advent, would you turn your eyes to Christ? Not just looking back, but looking forward as we long to be with him, day in and out, seeking him in his word, getting in prayer, aching to be in his presence. Do you want true peace? Look to Christ. Look to Christ who has brought peace with God, reconciling enemies to the Father. Look to Christ who brings peace right now for the real trials and hardships of every single day. For more resources, visit emmettministries.org. And make sure you follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, and subscribe on YouTube for more weekly content from Emmett Ministries.